Today on Music Meanderings, who is Mike McGear and who is his famous brother? Hi, I'm Mike Lamneck. It is Music Meanderings. Thank you for checking out the channel and joining us. Please subscribe and make sure you like the video, and it helps out the channel. We certainly do appreciate that. So, Mike McGear. Now, if you're in the UK, perhaps you have heard of Mike McGear. In the US, well, probably not. In the United States, a lot of people probably know him better as Mike McCartney. Now you know who he is, right? Yeah, brother of Paul McCartney. But in the mid-70s, he went by the name as Mike McGear. Why? Well, because he didn't want to be taking advantage of his famous brother's last name. So that's pretty upstanding, I think. Now, in the UK, Mike McGear was actually part of a trio, a comedy trio. They released comedy songs, a lot of them pretty popular, and that trio was called The Scaffold. That group formed in 1962, the same year that the Beatles were having their first hits. Now, Mike McGear, or Mike McCartney, younger brother of Paul McCartney, born in Walton, Liverpool, England on January 7th, 1944. After first calling himself Mike Blank, he instead settled on the name Mike McGear, McGear being slang in Liverpool for fab. His band, The Scaffold, was signed to Parlophone Records, and they recorded a number of UK hit singles between 1966 and 1974, including a 1968 Christmas #1 single called Lily the Pink. Now, McGear composed the band's next biggest hit, 1967's Thank You Very Much, and then he signed to Island Records and released a solo music album entitled Woman in 1972, and The Scaffold also released their own album called Fresh Liver. Mike McGear and The Scaffold then added several other members, released 2 more albums on Island Records in 1973 as Grimm's. He then signed to Warner Brothers Records, and in 1974 he released his second non-comedy music album, McGear. That is the focus today. He collaborated with brother Paul and his band Wings. The record was even produced by Paul McCartney, who also played and sang backing vocals. Joining Paul on the record were his Wing bandmates, his wife Linda, also Denny Lane, multi-instrumentalist, and new guitarist at the time, just had joined the Wings band, Jimmy McCullough. Although 4 singles were released from the album, only Leave It really had any chart success, just cracking inside the top 40 in the UK. Now, here's how I found out who Mike McGear was, courtesy of this album that I found in the bargain bin a little while back. It's called The Force, released by Warner Brothers Records in the early 70s, and it was a compilation album, a music sampler released by Warner Brothers Records. And I've gone into this in more detail in another video. This album has lots of great tracks on it. It is a double album. But one of the songs on here that got my attention was the song Norton. Norton is by Mike McGear. And it got my attention because it's kind of got a novelty sound to it, similar to They're Coming to Take Me Away, if you remember that song, the 1966 novelty hit by Napoleon XIV. Very similar sound to that, even spoken word vocals to it, and kind of a novelty song. That got me looking into the liner notes, and on the liner notes, I saw that Paul McCartney had produced it, and then I looked further, and I saw that Paul McCartney was the brother of Mike McGear, who was actually Mike McCartney. So then I went and I checked out the entire Mike McGear album entitled McGear, released in 1974, and found it to be a great album. In fact, one that a lot of people call a Lost Wings album. As I said earlier, Wings plays and backs Mike on the entire album, and it does have a very Wings sound to it. Track by track, cut 1, Sea Breezes. Mike sounds a lot like Paul on the vocal on this one. In fact, a lot of the tracks on this album sound like they could have been lifted from a Paul McCartney solo or a Wings album. Now, I don't want to call them Wings outtakes, really, because that doesn't give them enough credit. That sounds like they were maybe not well produced, which they are. They're fully produced tracks. The next song, What Do We Really Know? A little more avant-garde, featuring classic Wings harmony backing vocals. The third track, Norton, that's the one I was telling you about, featured on the compilation. That's the one that got my attention first. Next is the single, Leave It, which ranks right up, I think, with the best of the Wings material. There was even a video. Back then, they weren't called videos. They were called promotional films. That was before MTV, of course. But there was a video done for the song. You can find it here on YouTube. It's very interesting. Have You Got Problems is an instantly likable pop song with some great saxophone work. Now, one of my least favorite songs on the album is next. That's called The Casket. And it's kind of a maudlin music hall style number that really slows things down, I think, and changes the pace. Things pick back up with Rainbow Lady, another song that could have been a hit single, I think, featuring those trademark Wings backing vocals. And I Simply Love You is a great ballad that would not be out of place on a Paul McCartney solo album. Giving Grease a Ride, one of my favorite tracks, and I understand that got some radio airplay at the time the album was released in Europe. It's a smooth, straight-ahead car song rocker that allows the band an opportunity to stretch out and jam a little bit at the end. The Man Who Found God on the Moon is a quirky mid-tempo song, and Mike really sounds like Paul again vocally here. In fact, I think you could play this for anyone and tell them that this was a lost Paul McCartney solo track, and you wouldn't get any argument from them. Dance to Do wraps things up. That's a fun album closer featuring long guitar solos by that new Wings member at the time, Jimmy McCullough. In fact, this was going to be the first recordings that McCullough did after he joined Wings. Also recorded during the McGear sessions with Wings was a Scaffold reunion song called Liverpool Lou, which became the Scaffold's last top 10 hit. It also led to the group reforming in 1974, and they recorded and performed together as the Scaffold through 1977. Now, individually, Mike McGear released a few more singles. His final release, while still using the name Mike McGear, was in 1981, and it was a satirical tribute to Lady Diana, released at the time of her wedding to Prince Charles. Now, in the 1980s, after retiring from music, Mike McCartney decided to end the use of the McGear pseudonym and revert to using his family name. Even while he was pursuing his musical career, McCartney was a photographer the whole time and has continued with photography since then. In fact, Beatles manager Brian Epstein nicknamed him Flash Harry in the early 1960s because he was always taking pictures with a flash gun. He has published books of pictures that he took the Beatles backstage and on tour, and in 2008 brought out a limited edition book of photos he had taken backstage at Live 8. In 2005, McCartney premiered and exhibited a collection of his photographs that he had taken in the 1960s called Mike McCartney's Liverpool Life, and Mike McCartney's North Highlands is a collection of his photographs taken in the Scottish Highlands, and that was published in 2009. In 2019, the McGear album was reissued, repackaged really nicely as a 2 CD, 1 DVD box set. And that same year, McCartney was awarded the British Empire Medal at the Queen's birthday honors for his services to the community in Merseyside. Mike McGear, worth checking out. So that's who Mike McGear is, Mike McCartney. And this has been Music Meanderings. Please subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.